Brilliant. Thank you very much. So yes, cheers, Pete, and cheers everyone for coming back. We appreciate it a lot. For anyone who didn't meet me in the first session, I'm Fraser. I work at Regen, who are basically a group of researchers who work on this kind of stuff. And we're looking into local and community energy and how we can make sure that that's sort of fairer, more inclusive, more beneficial to more people going forward. So we're doing this refresher now, and I think Pete said we'll do it at the end. I actually think it's useful to do it at the start to remind ourselves what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it. So Scottish Government have made a commitment to develop more locally and community-owned energy projects. So rather than just having big energy companies or developers come in, throw up big wind turbines and sort of hoover up the profits from that, they want to have more local places and people take some ownership of renewable energy. So that might be communities themselves, community groups, it might be local authorities, as we'll hear a little bit of tonight. So they've asked us, Regen, to figure out how to make sure that this really does benefit as many people as it can. That's not to say that local and community energy is the only thing that's going to happen in future. It's just part of the energy transition, as we say. So why are we asking yous about this rather than getting on with it ourselves? Well, we want to know what sorts of projects you would like to see. So that's why we sort of give examples as we go. We want to know, because the whole objective of this is to make sure that it works for people and benefits people. It's useful to know what kind of benefits you would like to see in this kind of project. And we want to understand how we can make it fair so that people in places everywhere realistically do have a chance to participate and feel that value as it happens. So we heard in the first session from Callum Watkins, who did the big picture, here's how the energy system works, and he answered loads of questions. We then heard a little bit about more sort of local approaches and community approaches. And then last week, we heard about 3 different sorts of ways that community energy in particular happens. So what I want to do for the next 5 minutes or so is revisit and summarize those 3 different models that we heard about, make a couple of points, and then again, just sort of remind what it is that we're trying to do and the things that we'd like you to keep in mind as we get to our deliberations. So last week, we heard first from Chris Morris at Local Energy Scotland about traditional sort of community-owned energy projects. What is community energy? Well, generally, it's when a community group, so that can be any ordinary folk from any community in the country, or it could be a community organisation or a charity, whoever, they come together with the purpose of developing their own, maybe a set of solar panels on some local waste ground or on a community building, maybe a wind turbine if they've got a bit more space, if they're a bit more rural, with the purpose of having some locally owned renewable energy that makes money for that community. The way that that happens is they approach Local Energy Scotland, who you'll remember from last week are the organisation that support community energy projects with money, with legal support, with technical knowledge, all that good stuff. They support these community groups who want to do a project to identify places that the project could realistically happen, the technical things that need to happen to get your panels installed or your wind turbine or your heating technologies, like we heard a little bit about last week. They basically hold the community's hand through that process. Once they've done all that, they've identified where they want the project to be. They then find the people required, the Sparkies, the joiners, whoever else, to come in and actually do the installation. Installation happens and everyone's happy. Nothing could possibly go wrong. They then sell the electricity that they generate from their turbines or from their panels, usually, to either local buildings. So that can be local schools, which happens quite often, local hospitals happens quite often, or local businesses, industry, whoever it might be. They either sell to those local properties or they sell back to the national grid. And then all the profit that's made from that gets pumped back into the local community. That can be spent on anything that the community decides. Usually there's a group of people in a community who have some decision-making power over that. Anyone can get involved. And that can be on anything, but usually or often we find it's on things like helping people who can't afford their energy bills, helping with insulation, or with skills and training for new jobs, opportunities, things like that. The crucial thing about community energy is that it's owned by the community and the profits go back into the community. A good example of this, some of you might recognize the very excited looking man in the middle in the blue jacket there as Callum from our first session. So about 5 years ago, me, Callum, and a few others around about Glasgow set up 2 community energy projects right in the middle of Glasgow, or one right in the middle, one in Pollokshields and one in Easterhouse. We chucked up a load of solar panels on a couple of schools. We sell the energy from the panels to the schools. Anything that's left over gets sold back to the grid, and all of the money goes into those 2 local areas for local projects or initiatives or funding that the community wants to see. So a good example of, it's not just about, big turbines in the Highlands where a community can afford it. It can happen anywhere, depending on the space or what it is you want to do. So that's community energy. We then heard from Christina about shared ownership. In shared ownership, you have a big developer, someone like Scottish Power, for instance, come along and say, we're going to chuck up a load of wind turbines or solar panels or a big district heating system. Does the community want anything to do with this? So the Scottish government just now recommend that when a developer does a big project, they have to go to a community and see if they want to buy some of that project so that they can make a bit of money off it as well. In this instance, the big developer does all the planning, does all the technical stuff, all the big stuff. They then go to the local and community groups. Usually it's through community councils or something similar. They have a negotiation, decide how much the community wants to take ownership of, if they want to take any ownership. It does depend on how much money a community can raise to buy that ownership share. As it stands, that could change. But as it stands, the local groups or the community raises a chunk of money to buy a chunk of the project. You then have whatever the project is, sells all its electricity to the national grid, makes a ton of money. The developer, obviously because they've invested and built it, they take whatever profits from their share of the ownership. And then the same as community ownership, that then goes into your community benefit fund for whatever the community wants to spend that. So that's shared ownership. As the name suggests, it's partly shared, partly owned by the big developer, partly owned by the community, but the community has a bit less work to do in terms of setting the project up in the first place. The final thing that we heard about is the Ripple model. This was Sarah's pitch at the end of the last session. In this case, Ripple, it doesn't have to be Ripple, I should say. Ripple are a company, but any organization could realistically do this. A community energy group could do this if they wanted to. But Ripple take on the task of setting the project up in the first place. So in the case of Ripple, they set up one big turbine. They do all the legwork around that. And then they open up a share offer, which is basically just a big crowdfunder, and say people from anywhere across the UK can pitch in from £50 up to a few £1,000 to have a share in owning that wind turbine or that solar farm or whatever it might be. What happens in that case is they set up the project, they sell their money to the grid. That will be no surprise to anyone anymore. And then when that project is generating electricity, when it's selling that electricity, you get money off your bills, or rather you get money back, similar to the way like a tax rebate works. If it generates lots, then you get a good bit of money back. The catch here is that how much money you save individually depends on how much money you're able to put in the first place. So if you can only put in £50 versus £3,000, you'll get a lot less saving on your bills, but you'll still have some ownership within that project. As it stands, the way that Ripple do it isn't completely local or community owned either, but like we say, that could be the case if that was thought about and brought to bear. So those are the 3 models that we heard about, and I've summarized them in this table. We're not going to talk about it. It's a mess. I apologize profusely for that. But what I do want to emphasize about this is, first, this might be useful when we share the slides after, just to revisit. But what I want to emphasize is that we've talked about these different ways of doing it, these different models, but we can mix and match as well. So when we said there, the way that Ripple do things lets you sort of effectively save money on your bills, that could also be done by a community organization or within a shared ownership project as well. When we say that Ripple give you money back and that's the only real benefit, they could also provide local and community benefit if that's something that you value. this is a key point that I want to emphasize, not to complicate things, because if you like one model, you like one model, and that's fine. But I guess something that we would like you to keep in mind going into the deliberation is, first, that point, we're not saying that this is the way that everything's going to be done. This is just something that's happening more, and we want to make sure that it's accessible and that you kind of see what you would like to see reflected as it happens. But also we're interested in, well, what do you like about some of the projects that you've seen, and what do you not like? What bits are appealing to you? What bits might make it challenging for you or someone in your community to get involved? Who do you think should be leading on such projects? Who should have responsibility for them? What kind of support would be needed to make a project like that viable in your community? What kind of, financial support or policy support, whatever it might be? And importantly, what kind of benefits do you want to see? This is a large part of why we're doing this at all. If we're going to do more of these projects, as Scottish Government says, to benefit more people, then it has to benefit folk, I would say, in a way that they would like to see benefit happen. Final point then is, we kind of redoubled that there, is what would have to happen, what would have to change to make this sort of thing actually possible and actually fair for yourself, for people in your community, or for your area more generally. So it's not just about, well, I would like to have a project where I pay X amount, I get X amount back, and there's a little bit of this for the local community. It's more thinking about, what do you see as challenges, either for you getting involved, for your local community getting involved, or for other people, to make sure that it is fair and that as many people as possible can feel some of the value as we see more of these going forward. That's it from me.